Hey, Jason Fallon here, and in this video we're going to talk about the hook process. There's only 3 steps you have to be focused on. First one is choosing it in advance. The second one is shaping it through the outline, and the third step is supercharging it. So let's start with choosing it in advance. I always ask myself this question first. What's the solution, and does it lend itself to an obvious hook type? And we went over the types in the previous video. If not, what would it take for it to lend itself to a specific and obvious hook type? If it's not obvious, it's going to be challenging for the solution. Although, of course, we can fit hooks around solutions. But it's ideal if it's pretty obvious what the hook should look like. And a lot of times if I look at a solution just through the specifics of how can we make this done as fast as possible or faster than what's normally accepted is okay, then there's your hook right there. Unique. If other solution providers aren't currently using it, that makes any hook even stronger. So most good marketers or most good product creators, they already use hooks. But the thing is, over time, many people copy each other. So if a hook becomes popular, a lot of different people will use it. The fact that most people are using it makes the hook not a hook anymore. So one of the most powerful things you can do is be different in terms of the specific hook you're using than what they're used to seeing in terms of that marketplace and what they're aware of. So that's why every market has different hooks that work better than other hooks and different times where these different hooks work. I like to work backwards. Really, hooks are more important than solutions or problems. So when I say I'm specifically looking for solutions that can be shortcutted and done faster, half the time, a quarter of the time, that's starting with the hook first. And then looking at thinking of what a solution could be to a specific problem based upon that hook. If you find a hook, come up with a hook hits you, or you spot a hook in the wild, then you're really cooking because you can work backwards from that hook and say, okay, if this hook is true, how can we solve a problem with it? And what would that solution look like to make this hook workable? Shaping the hook through the outline. Once you come up with your hook, which ideally you should do before you create the outline, although it's never perfect, right? Then you say, hey, now that I've organized my content in an outline, are there aspects that can make the hook even better and stronger than it currently is? So when I first created the hook for how to write an article in 7 minutes, I didn't add including proofreading and research. But then I noticed throughout the training that I covered those things, so I came back and added those to the hook. Pragmatism. What sacrifices would or should be made to the content to enhance the hook, or at least not get in the way of the hook? So there are instances and times where we have to change the solution or even part of the problem along the way just to make the hook that much more powerful. Now, it's always a give and take, so you just got to be aware of the scenario and that it's a possibility. But I would rather sacrifice and change part of the solution or change the focus of the problem if the hook is that powerful, because that's how powerful hooks are. Creativity. Are there certain things you can present or order in a certain fashion that makes the hook undeniable? So oftentimes, the step-by-step process, if you slightly alter that, does that improve the hook? Does that create more power in the hook? This isn't something you want to spend all day thinking over because it'll slow you down too much, but they're just quick considerations to run through when you're thinking about your hook specifically. Lastly, supercharging the hook. Combo mode. Can you add a subtitle or even a different title, 3 titles as we saw in one example earlier, that adds more hooks to your main hook? Can you create a bonus or an additional training or aspect to make the hook even more powerful and specifically believable? You have to make your hooks believable. If I say, hey, how to run a mile in 1 second, that's a powerful time-based hook, but nobody's going to believe it, right? So we have to make sure it's credible. So what are some credibility elements that we need or might want to consider adding on to make it even more believable, right? Feedback. Once you put the product out there, is there something customers are loving about the product that isn't obviously stated, and should it be? Now, some benefits are only available to people after they purchase the product and are not helpful to make people want to purchase the product. So it doesn't mean you add them automatically in, but you should consider them if people are talking about an element or aspect. So the 1-1-1 formula is exactly that. It was a small fragment of the original product e-class I created many years ago. And people so much resonated with that, I realized that was the hook. Didn't have it at first, but once I saw people were very excited and could understand that, then it was easy for me to focus on that as the product. Lastly, some additional considerations here. This is part art, part science. Sometimes you come up with good hooks and sometimes you don't. Don't sit around waiting for inspiration to hit you. Give it your best shot, move forward. This is why we create many different products, because eventually you're going to run out of ways to not come up with a good hook, and the result is a massively powerful hook that you can ride for many years in terms of profitability. Dynamics. What makes a good hook beyond the major components we discussed is standing out from the rest of solution providers. That is your primary consideration, to stand out and be different than those around you. Different in a meaningful way. That's important, in a meaningful way than all the other things they're used to seeing. How can you be different than those things and still be meaningful and purposeful and helpful with the solution you provide? Lastly, believability. Why should someone believe you or your claim or your hook? Is there a way you can prove it? Should you dial it down? Sometimes the best way to improve a hook is actually to dial it down, or even suggest, is it possible to? Or could it be that? Or how is it that? To taper down the hook. So just keep in mind, a hook is powerful until it's no longer believable. We want to press and push and stretch the believability, but we want to maintain it still. So these are additional considerations that you should be aware of when creating your hook.